Queens of Limbo, Purgatory, and All the Suburbs of Hell Hereafter by Jay Wilburn. He opened his eyes lying on his back in the empty parking lot. From there, he wasn't really sure what the hell was going on. The asphalt was cold instead of hot, and that was a change in temperature from the sunny day in which he fell. Those assholes were going to lose their jobs for this. His scaffolding was gone. The wall he'd been painting without explicit permission was as well. The crowd that had gathered had vanished. The police who climbed up to remove him from his platform were nowhere in sight. The sky remained as clear as the summer day he had started, but it was a bitter winter cold now. Antonio Lauren climbed back up to his feet. He was moving more like his father than the relatively young and fit man he was. It was only after he was on his feet again that he thought maybe he shouldn't have stood up after a fall like that. It'd be a hell of a thing to find himself paralyzed for life. Of course, there wasn't a soul around to help him for some damn reason. There should at least be some gawkers around with their phones out to capture his demise. None of his audience remained, but there was some sort of department store across the lot that he didn't recognize. A group of women stepped out as another one entered. There wasn't great signage, though, and he watched the group go because there was no vehicle parked anywhere Antonio could see. They weren't dressed for hiking either, not in this cold, not in those shoes. Through the empty lot, he caught the tittery laughter of one woman as she cried, "Tori, you're such a crackhead." Antonio decided that at that very moment that his next piece of art would be called "Tori, You're Such a Crackhead." It was the sort of title some people would get, and others would miss entirely. He almost liked it more when people didn't get it, especially the people his art was aimed to ridicule. It made him feel smarter, better, higher. With a title like that, it almost wouldn't matter what the actual piece or performance was. Maybe he'd create the piece outside the station for the cops who knocked him off his scaffolding and then left him to die. Then he looked up into the empty space where his last bit of art and the confrontation with the authorities should have been. He sort of stood dumbfounded for a while, waiting for the world to make sense again. Most of his art was based on the world not making sense. Everything is meaningless. That was the name of the installation he was putting up on a wall that no longer was there. No art and no audience to see it. His parents said he was just depressed and needed meds. Antonio had made his mother cry when he told her that depression, anxiety, and trauma was the art she created within him. He was darkly proud of getting that response out of her and the frustrated anger her sadness created in his dad. Art was supposed to elicit emotion, the more negative the better, as far as he was concerned, and navigating his parents' bullshit wasn't art. Antonio sensed his thoughts were moving slowly and drifting around on unimportant tangents. The important thing here was that he was no longer where he had been before the fall. So where was he? He had wandered after falling the first time. Why had he wandered after falling the first time? Why hadn't anyone stopped him or helped him if he was that dazed? Was this even real? It felt real. The change in the weather made no sense. Never mind the complete change in location. He started to cross the lot toward the building and then paused when he realized for the first time that he was barefoot. He was also wearing some sort of light linen suit instead of the jeans and paint-spattered t-shirt he put on this morning. The parking lot was cold enough to hurt his exposed feet. He had to have a concussion. How else would he have missed all this? Why would he be missing time otherwise? Antonio wanted to believe that this was a dream he was experiencing on his way to the hospital in the back of an ambulance. How hard had he hit his head anyway? He reached up to feel and found his hair cropped close the way his dad would have always liked it instead of the dreadlocks he had worked so hard to grow. Antonio had come up with a whole spiel to explain why his dreads were not cultural appropriation. Now they were just gone. That made less sense than vanishing from his previous location to wake up here. Sure, it was a dream, but he wanted to warm up and hoped the heat was on in the drab-looking store. His feet felt blistered and numb by the time he saw his strange reflection in the automatic doors. Before he could step inside to warm up and maybe get some shoes if he could locate his wallet in these strangers' clothes, those doors opened and a woman with a short blonde haircut stepped out into his path. He'd seen her kind before. "You need shoes before you come in here." She held up one hand just short of actually touching his chest, always teasing a confrontation, wanting the other person to make the mistake and justify her actions. That was her type. "I'm not sure what's going on, ma'am, but I'm hoping to get some shoes in here." Hey, wanted to say thank you for reading your writing. Oh, I appreciate you being by and glad you're enjoying it. Not sure what's going on here, ma'am. I was just hoping to get some shoes in there. She scoffed at him and said, there are places across town for the kind of help you need. He chewed at the inside of his mouth. Implied within that, right on the tip of her tongue, were the words, your kind. He knew that as surely as he knew this lady's archetype by heart. He said, I could use some help. Maybe someone in there could make a call for me. I don't think so. I already told you where to go. You need to move along. Do you work here? He caught a glimpse inside it and unsettled him. The place looked... listening to you while I work. Yeah, that's kind of what I use Twitch writing for, too. I'll be working on other things and put on a writer who's putting together something. The place looked almost abandoned. Things hung from ropes through the supports. Thank you for the follow. I appreciate it. Through the supports in the high ceiling, dark things, heavy things. She noticed him noticing and stepped up into his line of sight. Too close, way too close. He wanted to make her pay for it. Her type would be more tentative if they suffered quick consequences like that more often. You need to mind your business, sir. He could feel her cold breath. He could smell the stale coffee on it. Do you work here? He repeated. It doesn't matter, she said. You need to leave. Maybe you could call me an ambulance. Are you willing to do that? I think I might have fallen. Do you have ID, sir? He actually reached for his pockets instead of telling her to go screw herself. He was as curious as she was, though. It appeared his wallet was back wherever his pants were. I think I might have lost my... Of course you did. Good day. She stepped in and held the doors closed instead of actually locking them. Antonio gave a cold sneer and stepped on the sensor pad. The door popped open again, and she did her best to hold it closed, but ended up falling on her face. That's when the screaming and threats started, also the contradictions. You get out of here right now. Don't go anywhere. Give me your name. There were more women inside, sitting in the floor in small circles. They seemed hunched over. If they weren't breathing so hard, he would have thought they weren't alive. At least one of them was crying, bawling her eyes out, really. What the hell was going on in there? On one of the conveyor belts for a dark, dead register, a woman curled up in a fetal position, shivering, either sleeping or trying to. And those shapes hanging from the rafters looked so much like lynched bodies, whether they were real or not. Despite his cold feet, he decided it was time to move on. Antonio covered the lot in the direction the last group of women went after they exited, Tori the crackhead and all her giggling friends. It took a while, and the angry woman barring the door continued to yell at his back as she rolled around on the ground. The 4 lanes of the next road were empty, and the rows of stoplights cycled through their colors despite the lack of traffic. Antonio paused again. The streets were empty of traffic, but they weren't empty. There was a wooden desk sitting on its side in the turn lane. Papers blew up and out of the busted drawers, twirling away on the wind. Across the intersection, a rug with an ornate pattern underneath darker stains spread across 2 lanes. It looked like he could step on it and it might magically carry him away from all this. He pictured a redneck's pickup hauling too much furniture, dumping all this, and driving off without realizing it. Who would transport a desk with papers still in the drawers? Antonio was liking this area less and less the more he saw. He finished crossing the street in a hurry. He found himself on a new sidewalk with little shops up and down both sides. The sun shined down, but it was still a crisp day. It was downright cold when the wind blew through the streets hard enough to rustle the leaves on the broad trees along the road, each in their own fenced area. A couple pieces of paper had settled up in some of those branches. This place was busier than the department store, lots of foot traffic. It appeared to be all young and middle-aged white women. Antonio both thought that meant it was a good neighborhood and also not so great for him. The shops included antiques, hair salons, yogurt shops, boutique stores with cryptic names that didn't really describe what they sold. Based on the windows displays, it could have been clothes, maybe specialty gifts, maybe engraving, who knew. A few of the women nodded at him as he passed. Others crossed the street to avoid him. Nothing new there. Where the hell am I? A dark-haired woman with wrinkles around the corners of her mouth turned sharply in his direction. Some but not all of those wrinkles smoothed out as her jaw opened wide. Antonio could see himself double in the lenses of her sunglasses. The image looking back at him appeared strange to him as well. After a prolonged silence, he said, "Sorry, I just seem to be lost." She shook her head and said, "Language." "Sure, like I said, I'm sorry. Can you tell me where I am?" "There are children around." Antonio looked about and just saw more women who appeared to be from the same offended tribe as this one. Where? He asked. He couldn't help himself. Then, past the woman's shoulder, he saw an older lady sitting in the middle of the road. She was slumped like the ladies back in that department store. Her legs were straight out before her and spread where she straddled a dotted lane line. The woman in the street started hitting herself in the face with the heel of her hand over and over. Never mind that, the offended woman in front of him said. You need to watch what you say, and you need to move on. You need to answer my question. He was looking at that disturbed figure beating herself in the street, though. Her nose had changed shape under her self-abuse, her face painted red under her attack. Let me get a drink of water real quick. Hold on. Who do you think you're talking to? He forced himself to attend to the woman right in front of him. I was curious who you thought you were talking to, actually. Maybe I'm a nice guy, in which case you should be nice and help me. I don't know anything about you. That's true, ma'am, and that's the other possibility. I could be a bad guy, in which case talking to me the way you are could be a huge mistake. So either way, you shouldn't talk to me like that. How dare you? You don't belong here. For once we agree. I want to get back to a place where I belong. It would help if you told me where I am, because I don't know how I got here. She turned and crossed the street like it was what she had always intended to do. You better not be here when I get back. Antonio laughed. It came out bitter, and his teeth chattered on the end of it. He needed to get shoes and better clothes. He needed to get inside. He needed help. But he decided to shout at the woman's back for now. Or what? What are you going to do to me? She had no answer. A couple other women glanced at him as they crossed the street. They walked around and ignored the woman in the road. The bloodied woman started crawling away from him, too. There was a bloody splotch left behind where she had been hitting herself. A woman at an outdoor table on a raised patio behind an iron fence called down to Antonio. On the sidewalk he now seemed to have all to himself. Never mind her, she's not used to where we live now. Antonio honestly wasn't sure if she was referring to the yeller or the self-hitter. He met the young woman's gaze. She was underdressed for the weather, too, and gooseflesh stood up on her arms. Her hair appeared a little longer than everyone else around the shops, but she had it pulled up in a tight bun. Her sunglasses pulled up onto her head helped keep the hair away from her face. Where are we right now, if you don't mind me asking? The woman smiled at him through the iron bars between them. He wondered if that made her feel safer talking to a strange man without shoes on the street on a day like today. Gehenna Village. He chewed on that a moment, but it rang no bells. Can you tell me what this is close to? Oh, I found a typo. Have to fix it. So tempting. She gave a chuckle and said, Suburbs, as far as you can see in every direction. Suburbs to what, though? What city are we near? She pointed over her shoulder down the road and said, Sheol Heights is that direction. If you keep walking, you can't miss it. There might be some help for you that way. You can't miss it was Antonio's least favorite direction. From his experience, you could always miss it, whatever it was. I'm not homeless. I'm just lost. I didn't say you were. I feel like I no more belong here than you do, but here we are, right? I guess. I don't remember what happened, though. She stood up, but left her plate and cup on the table. The woman shivered briefly, but then shook it off. It might help if you can think back to what occurred right before you arrived. Antonio stared, and his eyes lost focus as he seemed to be searching for something miles away. I was painting. I'm an artist. Then the cops started to climb up, and I lost my balance. So you fell, she said. Yeah, but what does that have to do with being here unless it is some sort of strange hallucination? Or maybe I look like I have a concussion. You're not a doctor by chance, are you? I could use help either way. No, sir, this is real. I sure wish it wasn't. So you fell, and that's how you got here. She seemed to be ignoring most of his questions and requests. Maybe she wasn't as nice as she seemed. I don't understand. Most people don't. I think that's how they cope with the reality of being here forever. He didn't like that. He didn't understand it, but he didn't like it. He took a quick glance at the small bloody puddle in the street and then looked back at her for fear she might vanish if he didn't. What does that mean? She walked into the cafe from the patio. I can't help more than that. You might find what you need down the road. Antonio ran around to the cafe's door. He knew he was acting crazy, but she was the only one who had spoken to him like a person. Before he got there, the door opened and a large woman blocked his way. "Can I help you, sir? I need to talk to someone in there. I'm trying to figure out what's going on." "You need to move on. You're not wearing shoes." Never mind." He turned and moved up the sidewalk with the entirely female population of Gehenna Village giving him a wide path. He stared at that bloody patch and then moved on from it. The shops gave way to rows and rows of white houses behind high fences. More discarded furniture blocked a road occasionally. Most of those collections were set up like displays in a furniture store. These did not fall off any truck. All the material showed signs of wear and tear from being outside in the elements. He wondered how cars got around these obstructions, why the police hadn't done something. Then he realized he had seen no cars or police since waking up in the empty parking lot. Normally that would sound like a dream world for him, but he felt entirely unsettled here. This can't be real. No one contradicted him as he watched faces peek at him through high windows. He could almost see them holding their cell phones at the ready in case he approached. He was getting to a point where he might welcome authorities of any kind. Then he saw them at the end of the sidewalk, near the entrance to the enormous neighborhood. There was some sort of symbol on the decorative brick where the neighborhood sign would normally be, but there were no words. This made Antonio nervous. Really high-end neighborhoods had started doing that. They figured if you belonged there, you knew what the neighborhood was called. Antonio guessed they would count him at the top of the list of people who did not belong. This group of women standing as if they expected his arrival did not look all that welcoming. He started thinking about what the last girl had said to him. How had he gotten here? He fell. What did that mean? A coma dream? He was in hell or somewhere between? It sort of made sense that his hell would be full of angry white women with short haircuts. But the furniture abandoned in the street, the woman hitting herself, those figures hanging from the ceiling of the department store. He stopped in front of them and waited for them to tell him he didn't belong. But this was where the sidewalk ended. So he was either going to go around them and walk down the center of the cold street, maybe hoping for a car to hit him or some authority to pick him up, or he was going back the way he had come for whatever that meant. Maybe he could crash on a street couch somewhere. Beyond the posse of women, mountains rose like a solid wall in the misty distance. What mountain range was that? He was far from home. The crew of ladies brightened as they went around and introduced themselves. Tori, Lexi, Diana, Peyton, Kim, and on and on. He stopped, keeping track. Tori the crackhead, he thought. "Pleased to meet you," he said without much pleasure. "I seem to be lost and could use some help." I'm going to change something here real quick. All right. "Well, we're here to welcome you to the neighborhood," the one who may have been Tori said. "If you'll come with us." He reluctantly followed through the nameless gate. The nondescript houses passed on both sides as they all moved through the street. Women watered lawns despite the cold. They picked up toys despite the lack of children. They spoke behind their hands to one another as Antonio passed. A woman with bald patches in her hair sat slumped in her driveway. Her sunglasses were askew enough to show that her eyes were dark-ringed and sunken. None of the women in the welcoming committee appeared inclined to check on her. Antonio had long ago decided not to get involved in what he called white girl drama. She tipped up a prescription bottle and dumped the last couple pills down her throat. "I'll have whatever she's having," he thought. "Could I get some shoes maybe, or make a phone call?" "We'll have you home soon," the one who was either Lexi or Diana said. "I don't live here. I don't belong here." The women giggled. The one who was maybe Tori said, "Don't listen to anyone who says that. Diversity is good for the neighborhood." The sun was setting and it was getting even colder. Those dark mountains hooking around behind the houses in the distance was looking more and more like a sheer wall. An old boxy television sat in the middle of the road. It was plugged into nothing, but occasionally flickered with snowy static before going dark again. Phantom signals, maybe a message from the devil himself, if this was indeed hell. Of course, in this version of hell, the devil might have to be an angry white woman, wouldn't she? He walked wide around the flickering set in the road. No messages, no answers. It just occasionally hissed at him before going dark again. This place was insanity. Everything was meaningless. That was the message. He tried to pick back up on the conversation. "Thanks, but no, that's not what I mean." Before he could explain, the women talked over one another, reciting all the neighborhood rules from what they called the charter. There were too many to remember, harder than recalling all their names. Never mind that there were TV sets and other trash in the road. Never mind the woman drugging herself in her driveway. Or maybe another beating herself bloody for no reason. The neighborhood had rules, though. He zoned out and kept following them through one turn after another, deeper and deeper into this neighborhood. How had he gotten here? He had fallen. If this was hell, why was he the only man here? Why were the rest of them here? What had he done in life to deserve the same place they had earned? He didn't like the implications of that answer. Antonio kept going, hoping maybe there was a warm house at the end of this tour. Maybe there were shoes and warm clothes. Maybe there was a phone. He hoped there would be answers, but that hope was very thin as full darkness settled over the matching houses all in rows.